Good evening and welcome to the Laugh and Monkey Music Show. Today I have a special guest, John Elder Robison. How are you?
I'm all right. Thanks for inviting me on your show today.
Well, this is extra special. I have autism and I've started to share over the past couple of years on the show, and not so much in the beginning, but more people have come to me. And one of the persons when I was late diagnosed in life with autism, my wife encouraging me to get tested and supporting. Once I learned I was, one of the books first I read two books. I read one from Temple and I read a book from you, Look Me in the Eyes. And it was life changing to me. And so to me, that was a good point of starting to own myself and not feeling alone in the world. And I think you've been a great advocate for presenting people with a realistic version of what autism is. I don't think the world has always been that way. But I do want to say before we start the show, you do a lot of different things. But one of the things that, since we are a music show, I want to put a little music part in first to people that do know. One of the things that John did was very, very cool, was involved with the special effects with Ace Frehley, who unfortunately passed recently. That was a sad thing. Can we talk about that? Kind of jump a little ahead. Just talk about your music part first, and then we can hop into the autism
Sure.
stuff.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, because one of the things that was really cool with your love for music, I would just go for music and production. But one of the challenges I had, because I didn't know, I was like stupid and a lot of the same similar things. I had a hard time in the recordings, so like connecting things. Visually, I could do it, but physically, I couldn't. I was having a hard time making that connection. Whereas you learned to visualize sound and frequencies, which was unbelievable. And then from there, you did like working on speakers and all kinds of gear to the point where I'm trying to bring people up to speed. You got to a point where you were working and you met Ace Frehley working on his guitar. If you could just pick up that part from here and just talk about that a little bit.
Well, I met Ace when I was working in New York City for Britannia Row, who was Pink Floyd's sound company back in the 70s. So they were set up to lease out Floyd sound equipment when they were not on tour. And they sent a bunch of equipment to the United States, and I became the engineer for all that stuff. I worked with Mick Lechinsky, who was Pink Floyd's road manager back in the earlier 70s. He's no longer with us, but he's the one who brought it to the United States, and I worked there with the amplification, the crossovers, the limiters, time delays, designed all that kind of stuff. We worked with Midas on the mixing consoles and Eventide and others on delays. We made our own limiters and crossovers. And so I was down there when KISS came in to lease a monitor system for one of their tours in the mid 70s. And I got talking to Ace at that time. And I'd never attempted to make a guitar, blow fire, or do anything like that, but I certainly had a lot of experience making guitars, basses, other instruments sound like the musicians wanted. And I thought, well, this is, the same, except you'll see it instead of hear it. And so that was how we got started. And it's like you talk about not knowing other autistic people. And I didn't know about autism when I met Ace or when I worked in music in those years. I didn't learn about it until I was 40. I don't engineer stuff anymore, but I'm actually the vice chairman of the Eastern States Exposition, and we put on the Big E, which is the fourth largest state fair in North America. So state fairs are kind of known for our music. We spend millions bringing in all kinds of musicians. And I do a lot of the creative photography at the fair now. And what's really cool is from my time engineering music and producing it, every year bands come in and there's people I know from back in the 70s and the
Yeah.
80s. And it's like just yesterday. And often as not, I'll talk to those people and they'll say, "Oh, you got to talk to our keyboard player, you got to talk to our drummer or whatever, because he's autistic or he's got an autistic kid or an ADHD-ish kid." And I realize that this autism and neurodiversity, they are really, really common in the performing
Mm.
arts. And,
Yes.
and whether that's like a symphony conductor who has the precise hearing to be able to distinguish which one of four violins sounds a certain
Mhm.
way, or whether it's somebody like me, that's what I could do. I could stand at the mixing console and I could listen to the bass without using the pre-fade listen button and headphones. I could
That's like a
just
superhero power
listen
to
to it.
me.
The thing is, at the time, I assumed a real engineer could do any of this better than I could. But now I understand that being autistic and the ability to do that is relatively uncommon in the wider world.
Mhm.
But among successful sound engineers, it is
Yeah.
quite common. So I realize now that the way I am is not so unusual in music, even if it's unusual in the general public.
Right. And that's one of the important things to me is because, as I said earlier to the show, like, first off, I never spoken to a lot of people that are adults that have high functioning also that have been married and have kids and have had jobs and careers. Like, I've had a weird path and it's been kind of goofy because I didn't know who I was. But it still led me to always the point with music and stuff. But one of the things I've learned with doing the show, which I started doing in COVID because I wanted to help artists get work and get merchandise and sell, keep them helping keep afloat, is the commonality of the artists and how easy it became. But also, as I started talking to the artists off the air, because I didn't promote that I had autism in the beginning because I didn't want people just coming on because I had autism. But as it came known, more and more artists were sharing to me and coming to me asking me questions about autism, which has led me to the point of you, because you're such a great public speaker about it, and obviously the music connection, you get it too. Um, it's very common, I think, in anything creative to
Yeah, and
on the
I
spectrum.
had I had no idea, but shortly after "Look Me in the Eye" came out, which was actually almost 20 years ago now, it was 18 years ago now.
Still a good
Um,
book. I actually had an
yeah,
audiobook I was listening to the other day. So
but
people get it.
so Phil Ramone was a really very famous and successful engineer for albums. So he produced well, he produced a lot of albums. He produced Billy Joel back in the 70s and 80s. He did Frank Sinatra's Duets album, which is one of the first digital productions that was done entirely remotely over internet or
Yeah.
data links. Um, and back in the 70s, we did a lot of the same bands where I did the engineering and sound effects and such for the live performances, and
Hmm.
he did the engineering for the studio recordings. And it was only when we each wrote books about this that we realized that both of us are autistic, and that was a really cool thing. And if Phil died actually a few years after the book came out, he was a fair bit older than me.
Hmm.
He was actually almost a Frank Sinatra's generation.
Yeah.
So he was like my father's age back then. But it's just such a cool thing to see these other leading figures in music production engineering, how many of us are autistic. And I think that's, if you read Temple's books, and she talks about
Yeah. I've read a couple.
seeing these things, seeing the music is a kind of a logical extension of the kind of stuff she talks about, like seeing like a cow or feeling
Hmm.
these things. I describe in I have a chapter one with the machine and Look Me in the Eye, where I talk about what it actually feels like to feel things like lighting and sound systems as they run, and to feel it just like you're pushing the throttles on a big
I love
engine.
that. I love that.
And and that's a very real thing to me. And and I would like it with the lights. I would feel the power of it as they came up, and I assumed everyone did. And and most people don't. But of course, back then we did our very best to make sure you did feel it. We made sure that when they hit a bass drum, you felt a solid thud in your chest, even if you were 100 feet back in the audience, you felt it. And that was part of what drove us to make the music alive for people.
I don't think people realized that back then, and I mean maybe now more because it's out there. And of course, people like everyone's like, I have ADHD, must have autism because you get that whole when something becomes known, everyone kind of beats the term to death. But people that really have it, I don't think those people generally don't know aren't totally owning it to the fact that they feel comfortable and realize it's an asset, it's a superpower to me,
Well,
you
it,
know.
it is an asset, but it also is a disability.
Well,
My
that's always been
ability
the negative,
to
yeah.
Right, for my ability to have conversations, especially with strangers, I never quite knew what to say. I was always significantly impaired in my ability to talk to people. But the great
Mhm.
thing about music is everyone in music in my time there, I think largely today too, we were all like outcasts and freaks.
Yes.
And so if you were able to contribute to making beautiful music and putting on a show that the audience loved, it didn't matter very much what you looked like or sounded like or talked like. It only mattered what the performance would be. And if you were a part of that, well, then you had a place there. And that was a great thing because that was something that made it possible for music to really set me free and give me a first career. The fact that I would be accepted just as I was, and I wasn't. I was just as much a weirdo and a freak as everyone, but I wasn't any more so.
Right. It was a celebrated though in the music industry or art. It's usually not
Oh,
a
it
negative.
was, yeah. I think we all saw ourselves as, yeah, we
Individuals.
were the weirdos and outcasts and stuff, but we were the ones playing the music people wanted to hear.
I've always stuck out in a way and been whatever, the wise guy, the jokes, whatever it was, the same kind of things you describe in your book. But and even speaking to people has always been hard. But like doing this show when I started doing it, I've spoken to probably over 600 people now. So talk about
Yeah.
my doctor be like, see one, do one, see one, do one. Example, you train yourself. So I mean, I've learned to become a better speaker because of this show, in spite of myself. You know,
Well,
otherwise
I've
I had the same
learned to be a
struggles.
better speaker. Yeah, I've learned by getting older. I'm certainly more comfortable talking to people than when I was 20 years old or 30 years old. And so I understand, the same thing you're describing. But I didn't really have to change much to be acceptable to musicians.
Right.
And even if people who weren't musicians thought that I was weird, well, I did things everyone could see, and that was tremendously helpful to me in setting me up for doing regular engineering for companies because the work that I had done, it was on 2020 and it was on 60 Minutes and it was on the nightly news.
Hmm.
Anytime somebody the stature of Kiss would play a city, we were on the news that night and such. And so that gave me a kind of a credibility to get a regular job in engineering digital sound effects when that was just starting to come to toys and games. And and I would say autism made all that possible for me, and my initial success with live music gave me kind of credits, if you will,
Hmm.
that other people could see. So even if I sounded weird or whatever, they could see that I had done these
Right.
things, and it wasn't such a big stretch to think, well, if I did it for them, I could do it for them too.
One of the things I've seen you talk about, and then you actually brought up a point that I always thought was true, and I think Temple's talked about it too, is sometimes with all the special groups nowadays, they don't allow somebody to push themselves forward. Like it was real hard for me, and I probably have super low self-esteem at times. But if I had had all those super guardrails up when I was younger, I probably wouldn't have been to the point where I'm married and I have 3 kids and a grandchild and pushed through to a career. If you like you, I think you've actually said too. I hope I'm not misquoting you. That you've also felt you wouldn't have had the same success if you had some of the disability guardrails now that some people get for people with autism. Did you follow what I'm saying with
Well,
that?
I think that if
I
if
hope I didn't say
people
that.
told, yeah, if people had told me that I was disabled and I should be in a special ed program, I should ask for these accommodations in school. I do think that while those things are, they're good for helping kids complete school and get good grades and such,
Of
no
course, of course.
question, they work for that, but they also they aren't real in terms of setting us up to deal um, with adult life because the
Yep.
real world doesn't give accommodations. And and I say to people often that it's great that you get those kinds of things, but once you leave school and you go out in the working world, you are going to have to face the reality that if you do not learn how to present yourself in a way that's acceptable to most people, you will find it very, very hard to succeed in life because people are going to give you 10 or 20 or 30 seconds of looking and listening to
Oh,
you
yeah.
to decide if this person's worth, continuing with. And if you fail that test, you're going to lose that
Yeah.
opportunity.
You're gone. I was known as Chip because I was too intensely focused on something, even though I could do the job for that reason. The people skills.
Well,
You need these.
right. So the exception to that is if you become sufficiently well known that people you meet all know
Mhm.
you as a great expert in this particular area, then if you sound totally off the wall, they think, well, this guy's this great expert. I better pay close attention. But if you're just two people walking up to
Right.
each other in a restaurant or something, you don't have that going for you. You need to know how to present yourself to be acceptable. And so in the absence of any idea of disability accommodation, difference, or whatever, for me, it was simply, you've got to learn how to behave. And
Hmm.
Temple wrote about that. Temple wrote about how her mother taught her manners. And my grandmother was the same way. She insisted on trying to teach me manners. And she, of course, said she was never very successful, but I was successful enough to go out and engage the world. And and it did work. And because there was no disability support for people like Temple or I when
Yep.
we were coming into adulthood, it never occurred to us that we would not be able to go out and make a living. I mean, I didn't know what I would necessarily do when I was 16 years old, but I assumed I was going to become self supporting. And I
Yep.
think, Temple, who I've been friends with all these years, she assumed she would become self supporting too. And both of us did. And I don't think that a fair number of young people today necessarily have that assumption.
Right.
They, I talk to a significant number of people who say, well, I'm applying for disability or I'm on disability, and parents will say, well, I've gotten my adult son or my adult daughter on disability over this, and that just really wasn't a thing when I was growing up. And on the one hand, I think that the idea of disability that'll pay you when your parents are gone, that's good. But there's also a lot to be said for becoming self-supporting and more independent in society if
Right.
you can do it.
I think that a lot of more people can than aren't. And of course, I think there's a lot of people that can't do it that need it definitely. But I also didn't come into this until I was in I don't know, my 30s. I don't even know. So I also didn't come into it. The one time I came across when I got diagnosed, um, between careers later on, they had a little program where the state helped pay for you to go for training for a little computer training for like a couple months.
Yep.
That was nice. That's the only thing. But like to me, I've already been a grown up. I had kids and a family. I was changing careers. It was a nice little addendum to me. But for me also, I don't think I would have pushed because I would have just been like, oh, this is who I am. I can't achieve this because there are walls in front of me. I think maybe for adult education or for maybe it should be like support and either work on finding a path for some people to do a little bit more than they can to encourage them and not feel like you're stupid, but also, no, you can move forward. What can you do? Whether it's the arts or music, something, because there is value in that I don't think
Yeah, it's
everyone's getting.
tricky because when I say that we have to learn to go out and support ourselves, sometimes people will say, well, that's terrible. You don't know my son, or you don't know my daughter, or you don't know me. And how do you know that I can go out and work? And of course, I don't know that you can go out and work, or your son or your daughter or whatever, but I do know that throughout history, autism like you and I manifest was not known as anything other than those people act somewhat different. And
Right.
the vast majority of people who appear as you and I do became reasonably independent, self supporting adults. We did not need
Right.
disability support from the state to survive.
Right.
And so, as I say, I don't know your kid or your kid or your kid, um, but I do know the majority of us are able to go out on our own. And I
Right.
feel like approaching this from the perspective that we will be self supporting and only falling back on that if we can't is fundamentally healthier than
Mhm.
what I see in some young people today, which is I'm 16 years old and I'm hoping I can get onto disability when I'm 18 because I've been on disability supports all the way through
Right.
school. And that
I think
that to me is not a great thing.
you, sorry to mean to step on you. You mentioned actually one of your blogs, you had an idea also like a kind of like a work training thing for people too for autism. I think I like those ideas because it's very forward thinking that I think if people work and you do something, even if you're not fully supporting yourself, but if you're still doing something and you're contributing, I think it helps your self-esteem. I think it
Yeah,
helps
you feel
everybody.
better.
So even if you're working part-time and you're just doing something that maybe you're not working with people, it's still important and you're still doing something and there's still a value to it. You don't have to be like doing buildings or making $1 million and sufficient, you know what I mean?
Right.
But I think there's a value in looking at each person and what they can do, to dig deeper. And I think you
I,
had mentioned an
I
idea like that.
Yeah, that's true. We had a school program here, which the state funded for about 5 years, and then they stopped doing that. But the state still places people with developmental disabilities here in our company. And the state gives us money to subsidize their wages for a year or a little more than that. And then they hope that the people can grow into being employed on their own. We have people here working like that. We employ people with autism and other developmental disabilities at the Big E at the fair. And none of those people, if you ask them, would say, I'm a disabled person working here, or I'm a disabled person. They would never say that to you. They would say, I'm really proud to be part of the team here at Robison's. I'm proud
Yeah,
to be part of the Big E. This is my job at this place, and I'm really proud of it. And I think that's the way to look at it. Yes, we do believe. I believe in giving people like that opportunity, and not every employer would do that. Um, but I certainly don't expect people to hold themselves out as disabled people that
right.
are receiving any kind of charity because they're not. Once they're established, they are part of the team and they work here, and
Mhm.
this is their job. And and I think that in our automobile business, we restore high end cars now, and it's reasonably widely known in the collector car world that I'm autistic or neurodivergent. But it's also known that our restorations and cars that belong to our clients, we win for our clients at every major show in North America. So we certainly are not asking for a charity. We go out there and we
Oh
compete with
yeah,
everyone else who presumably are the best in their respective areas, and our customers stand equal to anyone else in quality of the cars that they and we present. And so that causes some people, I think, to say, yeah, these guys at Robison's are these kind of autistic freaks, and of course they know every detail about this old Bizzarini or this old ESO or whatever, because
yeah,
that's what they do. They're autistic and they remember things that you and I don't, or they pay attention to things that you and I don't, and they genuinely appreciate what they
yeah,
imagine as the power of that. And at the same time, I think they understand, well, there's a side of it that's disabling, but so what? The car won. And that's what matters there. And it's kind of the same thing as the music. It doesn't matter if you're
right.
disabled in a conversation if people love the song.
I do think on that level, I think I've heard this about sometimes higher music people and higher industry people, if they want something done specifically. I mean, it's more known with like like the Google and everything like that with computers that you want. They're like, I want an autistic team. It's almost like an inside joke now. I want a fine-tuned machine that's going to know what they're doing. Because if you have something,
Yes, I think if you're in tech, tech is
what I do.
strongly driven by logic. And autistic people have weak emotional sensitivity and a strong sense of logic and structure. That's kind of part and parcel of the definition of autism.
Mhm.
And so, if you're in a field that's governed by logic and structure, which would be music, music is a very mathematical, logical, structured thing with the way we can construct
Yeah,
notes, chords, compositions, and the way we create sound effects is again, it's derived from mathematics and logic and computer programming is that way. All digital electronics and digital engineering is all logic. So yes, absolutely, people are going to want autistic folks in those roles, but at the same time, all those companies that do these things, they have to have really emotionally sensitive people who can go out and be the backslapping good old
yeah,
boys and good old gals who can be everybody's best friend and know exactly what you're thinking and feeling, because that's what it takes to be
uh,
effective in customer relations and sales. And you can
that's hard.
shake your head at it, or I might shake our, but the thing is, those people
No,
can
it's
look at
important.
you
It's
and
hard
I.
though.
Yeah, they can look at us and could say, I could never do what they do. And if we recognize we can't be what they are, but together we're much stronger. And that
Mhm.
speaks to this idea of recognizing that there are different neurotypes in the world. And so we may be one neurotype and there are others, and the world needs all of us pulling together. And I think that's an emergent idea now. I wrote about that actually in the forward to Neurotribes. My friend Steve Silberman wrote Neurotribes 10 years ago, and that's really become kind of a foundational book for the neurodiversity community.
Mhm.
And Steve died last year, and his widow and his publisher asked me to write a forward for the 10th anniversary edition. And in the forward, I talked about how Steve and I had been talking for all this, more than this last decade, over this emerging idea of neurotypes. And he
Yeah.
sort of took that in to make Neurotribes the title. Um, but absolutely, there are these emotional neurotypes or logical neurotypes, and we all need each other, and we're all kind of equal in this. So none of us are really broken. We are all complete, correct humans as we are, but the ways we are can be very different from one another.
First off, if anybody's listening that aren't aware of these, you should write these book titles down. There'll be some links afterwards to go to these things and support and check out these, because these are very important books and things we're talking about that John's done, and Temple's done, and Neurotribes. All these are very important books to read and learn. Um, do you think, because I'm not getting political, but with the change of climate now, the government obviously is so supportive, and you're hearing things like what's causing autism and all those goofy things going on right now. Do you think it's taking a blow to this autism community in a way where it's like, or it can be, or the autism community can kind of just sidestep it and brush it off? You know what I'm saying? Like, is it knocking it
I
back a few
think
steps?
I think what's the talk of what's causing autism um, is what you hear from people who are scared by autism, who don't understand it. It's the kind of thing that you would hear from parents who just learned that their 4-year-old kid
Yeah,
has autism. And their first thought is, how did my kid get autism? And their second thought is, how do I cure it? And and so those are kind of natural reactions. Um, and it's difficult for people to wrap their heads around the idea of neurotypes. Some people are just born with different brains. People want a cause. And if they have a cause, they can have a cure. If you're just born with a different brain, that's it. You're different and you have to live your life as you are. And that's a hard pill for some people to swallow, especially if their kids have what seems like very serious disability, like, for
right.
example, if they can't speak or if they are displaying signs of significant intellectual disability. If you have a kid with disability like that, you might not feel very warm and fuzzy about neurodiversity and different neurotypes. You might think, what can I do to help my kid? But the fact is, if you have a kid who does not have the ability to speak at age 4 or exhibits signs of significant intellectual disability at age 4, there may not be much you can do.
Right.
That may be what it is. And it kind of has always been that way. But we don't want to accept that now. We want there to be a cause, something to blame, someone to
Right.
blame, and something you do. And I think that the current climate um, embraces that, even as millions of people like you and me continue to exist and recognize that we were born this way and we have kids and our kids are born this way, and our parents and grandparents, even if they're no longer living, we recognize they were this way, and that's why
Before these
we're how we
products were
are.
even made, before the products were even
That's
made,
right. Yeah, right.
I mean,
Yeah, and I think that those are maybe well-intentioned denials of reality that appeal to frightened people,
hmm.
and also they appeal to people with family members who are quite profoundly disabled, and they want an answer to magically undisable them, but the answer doesn't exist.
Uh, Thank you for that answer. That's a very good, concise answer. I do see it, and I do see it as a disappointment because I feel like it's been such a struggle to get people just on board with like just like everything else in life that you don't need. There's so many other just I don't know how many different versions of genes and reasons why you can have it, and they still haven't found a certain thing to put one label on and have everybody go, oh, that's it. Which just feels like it was just like a pushback for all the doctors and all the years of people doing stuff. It was like, come on, not cool,
It
you know?
it feels that way sometimes, and it bothered me when the National Institutes of Health took down videos of me and so forth, and they took all of the descriptions of diversity off the
Yeah,
government websites. But I thought, this is the government Americans elected, and this is the choice they've made.
I know.
And certainly, if they want to reject diversity, it's kind of like burying your head in the sand and hoping you're going to make it go away. I don't think it is going to go away, but if they want to try for a few years and see if we can talk it out of existence, well, we'll be around when the cycle
I,
changes.
I agree. I'm not. That's funny because I'm not worried about people like you and me. When I see the things like, by the way, back to your public speaking, you're a great public speaker. But like, one of the things that like I think that's what the world needs, and so I do think this will pass. And that's why to me it's more important not to have you on now because there's less of that being supported publicly to keep the flag going in the meantime. That people know there's resources, there's still people. It's a real life thing. It's manageable and there's potential, and it's not just to give up. There's so much out there that we can do help each other out and support each other. Um, you're a perfect example of all the support you do for the for autism.
Well, yes, but I also am an example of someone. I don't ask for disability accommodations. I don't ask to be given preference in hiring or preference in anything at all because I'm autistic. I
Right.
recognize that I will be most respected if I go out and compete on the basis of my skills, not
Mm.
compete by asking for accommodation because I can't do something as well as the next person. And and I think that it's well worth keeping that truth in mind, because for every person who says, well, I'd like extra time on this test in college, there is going to be some parent who says, that's not fair. Why can't my son or my daughter get extra time because they were tired, their mother was sick, or they were sick? They're just as deserving as him. Why doesn't my kid get that? And of course the individuals, they think that too. Why shouldn't I get that? I was hungover because I was partying. He's autistic. Well, we both are disabled this morning. And there's something to that argument. Um, and And it's like, well, where do you draw the line? Is it because the autistic person gets the accommodation? Well, does the person who went to the doctor and was told that they have flu, they get an accommodation? And is it the person who just thinks they have a cold and they're tired? They ask for accommodation, they get it. Someone who admits that they had too much to drink, do they get it? And you recognize ultimately that anyone who asks for it has a similar moral authority in asking, saying, I think I need more time. And so I think that some of this anti-diversity talk now is the recognition that if you're going to give it to one person, you should give it to every person. You should not give extra time to autistic or disabled people just because they're disabled. You should instead recognize that if you're going to give time to the autistic person, if you're going to give it, or
Mhm.
any person that you should give extra time to any person who says, need that accommodation today. And of
Mhm.
course, then it becomes not an accommodation for a few, but an accommodation for everyone who wants it. And when you look at the nature of disability accommodations, for the most part, every single person in a workplace or in a school will benefit from access to those accommodations. The idea that they are only useful to autistic people or people who are disabled in some other way, that's a fantasy. The idea, for example, that autistic people might want to wear noise canceling headphones because the work environment is noisy. Well, if the work environment is noisy, you and you and you and everyone else probably would benefit from the idea that if it was
Mhm.
bothering you, you could put on noise canceling headsets, but you can't. So they're right in complaining against that. You should have as much right to do it as the autistic person. The
Yep.
fact that somebody has a physical disability, or maybe they're going to trip trying to go upstairs on crutches, so there should be a ramp. Well, great. There should be a ramp for everyone, because one day you're not going to be permanently disabled, but maybe you will have injured your knee and you'll be very glad that there's a ramp. And and so every accommodation that we offer has the potential to benefit everyone. And I
Mm.
think that the current movement speaks to the truth that accommodations should not be reserved for the disabled. They should be available to every person upon request. And the reason you don't hear a lot of talk about that is the cost to make them available to everyone is assumed to be very high. But in fact, I don't think that's the case. The reason every building has ramped entrances now is because of the ADA, that you have to have wheelchair accessibility. You can't just have stairs. So you have to make the building accessible. Every building with more than 2 floors now, if it's a public building, it has to have an elevator. And and you look at those things, and it should be self-evident that most of the people who ride the elevator and most of the people who walk up the ramp are not doing
Right.
that because they have physical disabilities. They're doing that because they're easy to do. And everyone does
Right.
it. And we don't anymore think of the burden putting elevators in buildings for disabled people. The only way you would build a 6-story building today is with an elevator. You just accept that
Yep.
we're not going to build buildings that expect people to walk up the stairs. And
I think in the workplace it's good. I agree with you. I think like where I work now, I've never had a I don't have there's no accommodations, and I've achieved the best because my boss knows who I am and he lets me achieve the
yeah,
way I am. I make the same but like in the industry where I work, I'm not gonna say in the air, but it's everyone's supported to do whatever they need to do. It's not about even disabilities, like the sounds and noise, like it just works together. It's a
yeah,
very supporting
people should
company
just
to let people
recognize.
just be what they need to do, right? And I think that's
Yeah, they should just recognize
better
that
front,
everyone.
right? Because it works for me who has autism, but it works for somebody else that has no autism. But you're right, they don't want to hear that noise and they get distracted. It's the same realm that we're all allowed to take care of ourselves, and it still works.
Right. And so this is a backlash against the perceived reverse discrimination, which is in fact real. When a person with autism is allowed to use a noise canceling headset, and another person who's genuinely bothered by the noise can't do that because they don't have a medical diagnosis or a note from the doctor or the psychiatrist saying that this bothers this person, that is wrong. And, and of course, I don't think that means you take it away from the autistic person. I think that means that you
No.
give it to everyone. And that's I guess the struggle we have right now.
Is there a place where parents that are discovering it, or even older, even like musicians I talk to, like their kids are young kids or teens or single digits, is there a better resource that they could probably go to kind of start wrapping their head around the practical long-term life thought process of autism instead of being doom and gloom or being like so far on the other side? Is there, you know what I'm saying?
Well, I wrote a book
Um,
called Be Different. Be Different is really a self-help guide for
yeah.
people coming into adulthood with autism, ADHD, and other neurodiversity. And I took the ways in which those things can disable us, but also enable us. And I wrote stories describing both how the various traits held me back in life, but also how, in a different situation, they advantaged me. And so I think that the idea of that book is if you read it, you're not necessarily going to want to do the exact same things I did, but you're going to think, well, if he had this problem and it was hard for him in this respect, but he found this thing he could do, maybe I could do something sort of like that, and in
Mhm.
my line of work, I could do this, So Be Different is written with that in mind. And Look Me in the Eye is still a quite widely read book on life with autism because it presents a much more balanced perspective than the doom and gloom stuff that you talk about. Neurotribes by Steve Silberman is a very important work because it talks about
Mhm.
um, neurodiversity through history. And of course, Temple's books. There are many younger people who have written books on life with autism.
Mhm.
We don't have a whole lot of other authors of my or Temple's age who've written of life with autism from the perspective of 40, 50, 60 years because
Yeah.
there weren't very many of us that kind of came out, when this was recognized. But there is a great deal of writing, especially online, from people who range in age from, say, 15 to 35,
Great.
who grew up with the explosion of awareness. There's lots and lots to find now. I
Okay.
think the
That's
thing
good. I
that
mean, to
we
me,
older people, the thing we offer, I think, is that we have the decades of lived experience with the younger self advocates can't really speak to yet.
mhm. I mean, that's why your book and Temple's book, I mean, I first got diagnosed, those are the two I got to get perspective, but I didn't want to dive in because like when I first got diagnosed, it seemed like a lot of groups were like big on labels and going after each other. It just felt really weird. And I'm like, I know I've got some challenges. What's going on with me? How do I move forward? You know? And I thought your book had great wording in it, and Temple had some good wording in it. And it's just like move forward. But not everyone's like
Well,
that,
that's it. Yeah, I go forward with my life. Most of my time is spent operating the car company and getting my son ready to take over the business.
Awesome.
And it's not because he's my autistic son, it's because he's the son that I have to do this. And I want to see the company passed on and continue beyond me. So that's mostly what I spend my time on.
Yeah. Well, that's your enjoyment. Let me ask you. So, as we round this up, I want to ask you: any favorite groups you still listen to now that still carry over that you still love to hear?
We bring different bands to the Big E every year.
I saw
We
some of your pictures
bring,
online, and I wish I could have gone this year. It looked great.
yeah, we bring we bring hip hop, we bring soul, we bring country, we bring gospel, we bring classic rock, modern rock,
Yeah.
pop. We bring all that stuff, and I love all of it. All our performances. Um, I love the energy and the action, and just being a part of it. It's just really such a cool thing. I
Yeah.
don't know that I really have a favorite. It's just like I don't really
All right.
have a favorite car either. We have a lot of beautiful stuff that comes through here, and I
Well,
appreciate all of it.
I get like that too. That's why I was asking you because I hear it a lot. They're like, "What's your favorite interview?" I'm like, I don't know, like in what like in what realm? Because I can think of a million different things that were great for different reasons. I can never fine tune,
Yeah.
because it's a finite decision for me is really hard. So I was kind of curious if you could, if you could make a decision because I can't, you know.
Yeah. No, I
Uh,
can't either.
okay. I want to thank you for being on the show. I hope people picked up some good things from you. I'm going to put some links to follow you and support all these things underneath the show. Um, any last words, John? I want to thank you for being on the show, man. I appreciate it.
Um, no, I think we pretty much covered it. I don't really, I don't really have a last word.
Okay. I
So
appreciate it.
I
Well,
just,
thank you for being
thanks
on the show.
for doing it.
Thank you.